And I'll be going through some of these slides with you, and be joined by Hayley McCormick, who you will know a lot better than you'll know me, who is our exchange coordinator. First of all, I just wanted to acknowledge the land that we're on. So Hayley and I are both currently in Kingston, working at Queen's, which is, as we know, situated on the traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. And we're grateful to be able to live, learn and play on these lands. I'm grateful to live as an uninvited guest upon the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Nation. And in doing so, I'm hoping to acknowledge that the traditional territory has a longer history, one that predates the establishment of the earliest European colonies, and also to acknowledge the territory's significance for the Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live upon it, and whose practices and spiritualities were tied to the land and continue to develop in relationship to the territory and its other inhabitants today. I think it's particularly germane to be thinking about this as we talk about exchange and study abroad and going to other places where we maybe haven't been invited, to other lands that maybe have Indigenous peoples. And so I encourage you to engage with Indigenous peoples and communities and histories when you are on exchange, and also to do that when you're at Queen's as well. And so I just really encourage you, this is not a formulaic greeting, but something that I think should be part of your exchange experience. So in today's town hall, we're going to cover, well, basically a little bit about kind of the context for exchange. So how many people, for example, we're working with, and how COVID-19 has been impacting exchange. So what some of the potential disruptions are, which you've probably figured out by now, but I think it's still good for us to kind of go over so that we're being as transparent as possible. And then what our responses might be. And so then what the next steps will be for you after this town hall. So the idea of this is really just for us to be as transparent as possible as we can about what's going on, and to talk to you about kind of what we think is going to happen, and what responses will be and what you can do next. So just before I get started, I know it's been a long time since everyone's been on campus, and in the interim, we have been joined by a new member of staff, Nikki Gale, who is going to be the new International Programs Assistant. So you'll remember that there was someone at the front counter in the International Programs Office. So I think if you're on, if you have your video on, you should be able to see Nikki in the gallery, or depending on how you've got your Zoom set up. So welcome, Nikki, to the International Programs Office. And Nikki will be handling some of those outgoing tasks for you. I did also just want to address the fact that some students or some departments are going back onto campus at the moment, and we're currently in the process of finalising our return to campus plan. So we're still working remotely. We hope to have that plan finalised fairly soon, and when we have that approved, then we'll let you know what our plan is and when we're going to be open for business. But whether we're virtual or in the office, we will be supporting you exactly the same.
Tom, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know I'm seeing another window cover some of the slide. So I just wanted to give you the heads up because that might be in the recording as well.
Okay, so I can't really believe that we're talking about winter 2022 exchange already. I'm really excited for those of you who have managed to stick it out. I'm really excited for you. We have 227 students scheduled to participate on exchange, as you can see, to 54 host universities in 25 countries. So we are talking about a relatively high volume, and really that's kind of just to give you the context that sometimes you might email the IPO account and you may not kind of get an immediate response. We're trying as hard as we can to respond to everyone as quickly as we can, but just because of the volume and the complexity that COVID has introduced, it can take a little bit longer for us to respond to you. We also just, like I said, think it's just important that we need to be kind of transparent with you so you can kind of plan ahead as much as possible and make informed decisions about continuing to carry on the program. So in terms of the impact that COVID had on exchange, we're now looking, well over a year and a half ago, when actually we suspended exchange in China. That was when COVID first emerged, and then by March kind of realized that it was going to be a global pandemic, and that was when the WHO declared it a global pandemic, and so we recalled exchange students. I just do want to note that at that time, so some of you may not necessarily be aware of exactly how that played out, but actually what we did at Queen's was we recalled students, but we didn't require students to leave their exchange. So there were some countries where students felt safe and where they felt they had support that they required to kind of get through the rest of their exchange. And there were some students who, were looking at potentially kind of flying through 3 airports at the beginning of a global pandemic, and they didn't want to do that. So that was our kind of what we did in March 2020, was kind of give students the option, but we did strongly recommend that students come home. But I think the point about that is just that we recognize that you're adults, you're in charge of what happens in your life, but that doesn't mean to say that we're not going to support you, we're not going to be there for you. That is our goal, to keep you safe, and so we do that through sessions like this and also through OCAS, which is a really great tool to kind of help you kind of think about some of the issues that you might face on exchange, even with the exception of COVID. So then that recall, that suspension of exchange rolled through right through May 2020, October 2020. And then actually we're one of a handful of universities that approved exchange for fall 2021 and also for the winter, although the picture is looking, I think we're cautiously optimistic for winter, given that we are sending students out in the fall. So we're cautiously optimistic, but also just kind of knowing that things can change a fair bit and fairly quickly. So at this point, I just want to kind of talk about the potential future impact of COVID on the winter 2022 term. So potential disruptions that may occur. So OCAS, so the Off-Campus Activity Safety Policy, is administered by the Department of Environmental Health and Safety, and at any time, they have the prerogative to designate a location as being unsafe. So they do that in consultation with International SOS, who is that kind of service provider who does provide that support for you on the ground, but they also provide kind of strategic and information advice to the university as well. And we do that in consultation with the DFAT travel warnings, and also by talking to our counterparts at the U15. So the U15, for those of you who don't know, is a kind of group of 15 universities in Canada, and we talk with our counterparts there about what they're doing and how to kind of mitigate risk. So all of that to say is that it is possible that kind of based on a 4th wave, I don't know, will there be a 5th wave, and how different countries are responding to that, that there may be locations that are designated as unsafe. So secondly, host universities may suspend exchanges. So even though we don't suspend or designate a location as being unsafe, it may be that a host university or country will kind of close their borders or restrict access to the borders, or that a particular university will suspend inbound exchange. And so, I mean, that is, you know, a factor every semester that could potentially happen, but actually with COVID, it's just a little bit more of a possibility. So if you're in this situation, depending on what happens, we've seen that it can take longer for study permits to be delayed. Certainly, if we look at our incoming students, there was some concern that, you know, students wouldn't get their study permits in time, and the Canadian government actually did a really great job of promising permits by a specific time. But other countries, we can't guarantee that that would happen. So there may be a bit of a backlog. If you need to get to a language test center, then that could be impacted. And like I mentioned, borders may close, or there may be kind of changes to your flights, and depending on the travel insurance you have or the airline that you have, there may be, you may not necessarily get a full refund, or you might get a credit, and that may, we recognize that may kind of impact your finances. So there are a few different things that might be going on that could potentially disrupt your exchange. I mean, regardless of what happens, like I said, we're here to help you. So please do get in contact with us. Hayley has been doing an amazing job these past 18 months and before that, just to clarify. So let us know how we can help you. And if we can't help you in the IPO, then we'll connect you with folks who can. And at the risk of sounding redundant, I mean, this is not an exhaustive list. It's based upon what we've already seen happen over the past kind of 18 months or so, and what partners are advising us on. But again, we just want you to kind of help prepare mentally and logistically, because it's possible that the type of exchange you have in the winter will not necessarily be the one that you were anticipating. In addition to the disruptions I just mentioned, this is a kind of an extended list. So there may be some products or services in your host country that you might have trouble accessing. So, you know, the country may still kind of admit you, but there may be, you know, the city that you're in, for example, may be on lockdown. Depending on where you're going, the risk of exposure to COVID could be higher. And there are other, there are other risks. So we do strongly encourage you to be fully vaccinated by the time that you go, just because there's also the possibility that depending on which country you go to and what the particular university's policy is, if you're not fully vaccinated, then they may require you to kind of restart your sequence, which would be probably not ideal, although not insurmountable. So again, this is not to scare you, and it's not to say that exchange isn't happening. It's just we want you to kind of be going into this with your eyes wide open, and so that you can kind of talk about these things with people that you trust, friends, family, caregivers, profs, and make a decision that is good for you. Like I said, Queen's is currently approving exchange for the winter. So, you know, we have been thinking about that. We have been talking to public health about that. We're here to support you. So we're not saying these are the reasons and you should just abandon exchange, but we just want to be very, very kind of honest about what some of the risks are that you might face. And Hayley's going to just go over some of the possible responses to the disruptions.
Thanks, Tom. So if we could maybe get some of the responses on the screen here, we can talk a little bit about what will happen should you experience a disruption for your exchange. So the first option we will provide is if your host university suspends, or if there's another insurmountable disruption to your pre-departure preparations for exchange, we would certainly consider a virtual exchange. This is something we've been seeing our partners really take a shine to in many countries, and some are doing it quite well, particularly the University of Sydney. I've seen some things on their socials, and it's pretty impressive what they're able to do. So this is something that we would encourage students to think about. You don't necessarily have to travel physically to a new place to be a learner in a different context, and that's entirely what exchange is about. So if this is a viable option, if this is something that your host university is presenting, it's something that we will help you explore. And it's something that we would put in front of you if we received any kind of notice either from you or from the host university that there was an insurmountable disruption by way of suspension or by way of one of the other potential disruptions that Tom listed. As well, if our nomination timeline allows it, we will certainly look to provide students with an alternative placement. So we've been working with students this year, both students who are going out for the fall term, for a full year exchange, and since June and July, we've been working with winter term students, particularly those bound for Australia and New Zealand, to secure alternative placements if host universities have suspended. I'm happy to report that as of now, there has not been another disruption that has prevented a student from going on exchange. So the main disruption of all that Tom listed has been a host university deciding to suspend, and it's typically been around public health guidance or border regulations, as Tom was mentioning. So when it comes to an alternative placement, what we will try to do is look at the partners that we have, which have available placements. And we do have about 140 partners in more than 30 countries around the world. So we work with lots of universities. And depending on whether they have, whether there is still time for a student to apply and for us to nominate a student, we can run what we call an alternative placement process. In that process, we will give you an information sheet. It will walk you through all of the instructions, the things that you need to consider, some kind of reflection questions will be prompted, and we'll be available for consultation should you choose to take this up. And an alternative placement really truly means that we are just switching your placement for that winter term exchange, but you're continuing on the program. And with careful research, you can ensure that you're still finding a suitable host university in terms of academics, finances, and your personal needs. So that would be the second option we would consider should our nomination timeline allow it. Now, our nomination timeline really starts to shrink as we head into September. Our partners have nomination deadlines that we have to meet in order for a student to be able to apply to their host university. And those come fast and furious beginning in September and usually wrapping in October. So we are looking at a limited amount of time for that second option. The third option, which I've noted a few students have taken up this year, is withdrawing from exchange, receiving that $200 program refund. So if you remember when you were admitted to the program, you paid that $200 program fee, and then reapplying for a fourth year fall term exchange with priority. So if you experience an insurmountable disruption to exchange, again, that's typically going to be your host university suspending the program, then we will place you with priority when we run the 2022-23 application cycle, which means you would be placed first. And that gives you a fairly good chance at the schools that you're considering at that time, should you meet the eligibility requirements, but it is not an absolute guarantee. Now, a fourth year exchange can be tricky, so there are additional application documents that you would need to submit, which include talking with your undergraduate chair or chairs if you're a medial or major minor, and having them sign off on your academic plan. And the reason we have that in place is not to act as a barrier, it's to make sure that if you do continue with the program at that later stage of your degree, you're doing so fully informed of what the potential challenges would be and with a really solid plan, so that again, you are hopefully meeting that graduation or that ideal graduation deadline of 4 years, which is what a lot of students aim for. So that would be the third option that we would provide, and we are able to speak with you about any of those options. If you experience a disruption by way of host university suspension, what will happen is our office will typically be notified first. We will then send you the update. We'll include the information from the host university explaining what happened to be fully transparent. And we'll send a follow-up email with those information sheets that I mentioned, and we'll lay out the different options that you have and the next steps that you'll take, along with the date by which you need to make a decision. So those are how we will be, though hopefully we won't need to be, but if there are future suspensions, this is how we will be responding and supporting you. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps? We have an idea of kind of how COVID has impacted exchange. Tom spoke a little bit about what the potential impact could be for your winter 2022 exchange, and I've shared how we're planning to respond. And I should note that although it's not anything that I'm proud of or had ever wished happened, we have become quite good at pivoting and being able to manage some of these COVID complications. So the plans that we've laid out in terms of our responses have been unfortunately well tested over the last year. So we do have confidence in those processes. So what happens next for you? As we mentioned in the email you received last Thursday, this is the first of 4 different sessions we want you to attend over the next 4 weeks. But first we want you to take a step back and just soak in some of the information you heard tonight. This might be the first time where you really sat down and reflected on how this pandemic, which is, continuing to shift and evolve, and especially on a global context, how this could impact your exchange plans. So we really want you to reach out to someone that you trust and have a discussion if you think that's necessary about continuing in the program. As Tom mentioned, that could be people at the university, like an advisor or a professor, that could be friends, that could be folks you think of as family, a counselor. It really varies, but it's somebody who you would be comfortable having that conversation with. Our team is also available for consultation. So if you've got further questions about anything you've heard tonight, you can go online and book an advising appointment, and we are happy to touch base with you and have a further discussion. After you've checked that off of your list, you will be attending those orientation events I mentioned over the next couple of weeks. So we have sent around the registration links. Please register for those. They are your academic orientation, your safety orientation, where we're going to speak more about the off-campus activity safety policy that Tom mentioned, as well as International SOS, that third-party travel and security provider. And the third is my favorite, and that is our social event. So it will be virtual this year, as will all of our events, or at least for the fall term. And the social event is called Exchange Connect. It's a great opportunity for you to meet the other students who are going abroad to your host country, get some connections, and have some conversations with your peers, because we recognize that's really important. After you attend your orientation events, you will need to complete your off-campus activity safety policy. We're still confirming the deadline for OCASP, as we call it, the off-campus activity safety policy, but it's typically due by the end of October. So you'll have lots of time, and the safety orientation that you attend is going to walk you through completely how you will complete OCASP. And as Tom was mentioning, this is a really, really great way to start to peek into what's happening in your host community in terms of COVID, but in terms of other security and kind of health and wellness considerations too. So it's an opportunity to learn more when you still have lots of time to make decisions about how you want to proceed. Amongst these various tasks and exciting events, you will be completing your host university's pre-departure instructions. So this could include, and this is after you apply. So first you will apply, and then you will complete other pre-departure instructions, including booking your travel, booking your housing, participating in course registration. So all of that will follow that application, and we have laid this out for you in the email that we sent around on Thursday of last week. And of course, throughout, watch for frequent updates from our team. We will keep you well informed as we progress through pre-departure preparations. Next slide, please. And to circle back, you may be wondering at this point, so how do I prepare for an exchange during the COVID-19 pandemic? That's a really important question. We would advise you to first consider your risk tolerance and your comfort level with going abroad. Everyone has a different risk tolerance and everyone has different comfort levels. It's really important to be honest with yourself, again, to engage in the pre-departure sessions we're offering, learn more about what's happening in your host community, consult with those you trust, and be really realistic about what you want that fall term to look, or that winter term to look like. And we want it to be, something that you're excited for and you're feeling comfortable with. So that's step one. And step two is just to start to mentally prepare for potential disruptions or suspensions. Along with all of the students who are currently going abroad on a fall or a full year exchange from Queen's, many have proceeded with very, very limited disruptions or bumps, but a few students we've been supporting who have experienced some bumps. They haven't been able to get their study permit in a timely manner. There's confusing information about quarantine requirements and the like. So as Tom was saying, certainly not insurmountable, but also maybe not what you had originally thought the program would entail. So just think about those, start to mentally prepare for those, and engage fully in our pre-departure events so that you can be having conversations with others. I really think that that will help. Determine if your health and travel insurance will cover COVID-19. That's really important. I don't think it's too early to start doing that. If you already have that mapped out, you are going to hear more about that at your safety orientation, which is happening in mid-September. Ensure that your purchases are covered by cancellation insurance or are refundable. This one's really important, particularly if you are thinking that you could withdraw from the exchange program at a later date. So we often get the question from students, you know, what if I don't want to make a decision right now? Can I decide in October or November? If I no longer want to go, is that okay? And absolutely, that's okay. But what we typically say is the longer you remain in the program, the more invested in many ways you are financially, personally, academically, logistically, when you think about things like your housing for the winter term. So while we encourage you to try and make a decision earlier, we recognize you might need to be making that decision later on. And for this reason, we really want to encourage you to ensure that your purchases are covered by cancellation insurance or are refundable. Also, because as Tom was mentioning, we don't know what the next stages of the pandemic are. No one does at this stage, and particularly on a global scale. So this just makes sure that you've got lots of good protection. And finally, please remember that this may not be the traditional exchange that you've previously seen others participate in. So there may be restrictions at your host university or in your host community in terms of social activities, in terms of classes. Perhaps we've had some questions from our fall term students about whether classes will be in person or on campus. And certainly with travel as well, which we know is quite complex during the pandemic. There are likely to be quarantine requirements. These could be forming as you're preparing to travel. So again, preparing yourself for some of that uncertainty will be really key, and making sure that you're keeping up to date with government and host university requirements. Culture shock while on the program could be intensified, particularly if you are needing to quarantine and upon your arrival to this new country, you have 2 weeks of isolation. So think about that as well. And the great thing about having a session this early on is you can connect with others and you can start to put together a plan thinking about what your needs are. And that's going to make whichever experience you end up having a little bit smoother. And of course, you could be recalled during the exchange. So as Tom mentioned, the recall 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago now, or a few years ago, was voluntary. We were able to support students, even while that was quite emergent, and we had never really experienced anything of that nature and volume before the university was able to pivot quite quickly with its partners and provide logistical support as well as academic support to ensure students remained on track to graduate. So while a potential recall could be in the future because of COVID-19 or for other reasons, do know that there's some experience in supporting students through something like that. And the most important thing is just to think about the various potential scenarios given some of the uncertainty with the pandemic. And of course, remember, you can always reach out if you want to have a conversation about any of this. Next slide, please. So we wanted to provide you with some additional resources. The great news is we are going to be promoting these resources at all of our sessions, pretty much. So advising with the IPO, you have a short link there that you can take a picture of or go on our website and find a link for and sign up for some advising sessions. As we've mentioned, we're partnered with International SOS. That is the third-party safety and travel provider. You can find information about International SOS at that link, and it will tell you how you can freely access the portal either via a browser on your computer or via the app if you wanted to download that to your phone. And starting immediately after this session, you can start to get really relevant, timely, on-the-ground information about your host community. I've downloaded the app before. I strongly recommend it. I found it quite useful. Advising with undergraduate chairs is something we're going to be chatting about at at all of our academic orientations. So stay tuned. More information on that front is coming. We've included Sandra Jeffers' contact information. Sandra Jeffers is a health and safety specialist who works in the Department of Environmental Health and Safety. Sandra also oversees the off-campus activity safety policy. So Sandra will be leading our safety orientation in mid-September, and you now have her contact information. So if you've got questions about OCAS, that is the person to reach out to. And of course, throughout your pre-departure planning, you may consider consulting with Student Wellness Services about physical or mental health considerations when you study abroad. when we study abroad, we take our whole selves with us. So if you rely on any services here at Queen's, be that the Queen's student accessibility services, if you see a counselor or a doctor on campus, it's never too early to start putting plans in place with your host community, and talking with those people that you connect with here on campus as well to make sure that everything goes smoothly with your transition. If in doubt, reach out to our team. Every year we help students liaise with their host university in terms of setting up accessibility and health considerations for when they arrive. So there's a lot of great people who are here to support your exchange and make this magic happen. So please be assured you're in quite good hands. And also remember to check out our new website for guidance too. Our team is working quite hard, and Tom's worked some magic online too. We've got a really stellar website that's going to be released shortly before the fall term, we're hoping. So make sure to check that out. We'll definitely be letting you know via email. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've reached the end of our session. We had a lot of information for you, and now the three of us, Tom, Nikki, and I, would like to open the floor to questions or concerns that you may have. So you're welcome to unmute yourself if you'd like and raise your hand to ask a question, or you can put any questions or concerns that you have in the chat, and we will do our best to address those. Okay, so we've got a question here. If class is online in the fall and we opt to take a semester off, can we still go on the winter exchange? So that's a really great question. And that's a question that I think might be quite particular to individual circumstances. So our advice in this situation would be for you to email ipo@queensu.ca, just so we can take a look at your particular exchange circumstances and give you that more personal advice and guidance. Okay, so another question here, if the host university is online only, will we be informed of it in advance? That is a great question. In terms of what the partners have been communicating, so sorry, to take a step back, each of our partners sends us an email in the fall term and they give us instructions on how we nominate students. So as mentioned in the email we sent you last week, the steps are our office will nominate you, you will apply, and then you will engage in pre-departure preparations with your host university. So in that nomination information instruction email that our team gets, we would get information regarding the status of classes. So whether those are online, hybrid, or fully in person, and what kind of restrictions the university is envisioning in terms of class sizes and things like that. So we would receive that type of information, and we would be sharing that with students at the time of nominating them, meaning they would have that information in advance of applying. Okay, so we've got another question here. Do you have any information about the UK accepting mixed vaccines as well, accepting mixed vaccines as full vaccination? That's a really great question. That's really particular, Tom. I recognize I'm taking up a lot of space in answering these questions, so I just wanted to note that, and don't know if you want to jump in it for this question or a future question. Okay. So in terms of that question about what the UK is accepting, that's information that you will actually be finding out when you complete your off-campus activity safety policy. So you will be required to take a look at the entry and exit requirements for countries in accordance with Canada's Global Affairs travel advisories. And that is information that you would be receiving as well from the host university. So as well as receiving information about what they are accepting or they aren't accepting, they're also likely going to be providing you with information about, you know, what you might do if you're in situation A, situation B, situation C. So I think that question is really going to be answered specifically by your host university and by the research that's undertaken during pre-departure preparations. Okay, so the next question we have here is, my exchange school's requirements are based on the 4.0 scale. So is there any way to officially see whether our GPA is on a 4.0 scale. The internet is giving me mixed information on the conversion. I am with you there. I've seen that many a time before nominating students. This is something that we will be vetting in advance of nominating you. So as we have also mentioned in our email communications, we are doing a review of everyone's academic progress to ensure that folks are still meeting the eligibility requirements of their host universities. That's going to be shortly underway before we commence the nominations. If you are meeting the GPA requirement that we have posted on our Finding University webpage, then you are continuing to meet the eligibility requirements for that school. So hopefully that addresses your question. Okay. The next question is, can I take one remote course at Queen's and then take another course at a host university? I think that's a great question. And I think that's another question that might be specific to personal circumstances. So I would encourage you and anyone else who's wondering about that to contact us at ipo@queensu.ca so we can give you kind of further guidance on that front. And someone is asking here, how do I obtain a PDF version of the official transcript from Solus? That's a wonderful question, and probably one many of you will have over the next couple of weeks as we engage in your host university exchange applications. And we're going to give you full instructions on how ordering transcripts from the Office of the University Registrar is working currently. When we were last advising students on this, it was in the spring, and students were still ordering the transcripts via Solus. They were sticking up a little note in explaining where the transcript had to be emailed to. So I'm not entirely sure if they have kind of progressed from that stage in their processing in the Office of the University Registrar, or if those are still the instructions, but you will receive specific instructions when you're nominated. So I'll ask you to hold tight on that one. Nikki, if you're comfortable, I don't know if you want to jump in and maybe ask some of the questions. I'm getting sick of my own voice here. So.
Yeah, of course, I could be your question asker.
Okay, amazing. Thank you.
All right. The next question is, will Queen's recommend medical insurance for students to exchange in some particular region?
I can jump in and answer that if you're also getting tired of your speaking, Hayley. So that's a great question. We don't recommend particular providers, and that's really just because folk can have so many kind of different requirements for different reasons that we feel that it's best to kind of let you make that decision. But if you are wondering about the sorts of things you should be looking out for, if you do connect with Sandra Jeffers through OCAS, she can give you some pointers. But again, it's really kind of based on what your requirements are, which can vary from person to person.
Thanks, Tom. Next question. If I will be taking a full year remote course in the fall, am I allowed to continue taking it in the winter during exchange?
Can jump in on this one. So in this instance, you would need to email our team because we would need to facilitate an approval process with your undergraduate chair. If you were taking a full year remote course, they would need to approve that because you would technically be in an overload in that winter term. This would also have tuition implications for you, and we would just want to make sure you're fully advised on that. So we'd want to look at your particular situation. So contact ipo@queensu.ca.
Thanks, Hayley. Next question, when will the nominations commence?
Very soon, very soon. So our first set of nominations are due next week. So I will be working on those this week. Typically, we are nominating students first to Hong Kong and to Singapore. So if you're placed at a host university in those countries, it's important you're watching your email over the next little bit. If you are placed elsewhere, you can check your nomination and application deadline on your host university's fact sheet on our Finding University webpage. So you'll probably remember that. That is the helpful guide that you used when you were researching exchange and applying. You can refer back to that and see what the typical timeline will be and when you'll expect to hear from us.
Great, thanks. Next question. When do we start applying for student visas? I understand that it might take a few months to process.
So you'll need to wait until you have your host university acceptance letter before you can start to apply for your visa. Host universities build, just like Queen's has, they build their pre-departure timeline for you and for all the other exchange students they welcome to their campus, keeping in mind potential wait times for things like study permits. Of course, COVID-19 has kind of made that a little more difficult and challenging because things are not as stable or certain as we're used to. But you can't apply for a study permit until you have that letter of acceptance. So that's really when you're looking, and we would encourage you, given the wait times that we've noted over the last year or so for various countries, we would encourage you to apply for that study permit if it is necessary as soon as you have your acceptance letter. Your host university is going to give you instructions and guidance on how to do that.
All right, next question. Is a 3.0 on both the 4.0 and 4.3 GPA scales the same?
So this might be referring to the question that popped up earlier. So we do an assessment when we have new partnerships of what the eligibility requirements are for Queen's students so that we can set that out before you apply to school. So again, if you're meeting the eligibility requirement that we have listed on our website, then we're not envisioning any difficulties with you meeting the eligibility requirements when you apply. As well as mentioned, we are doing an academic check. So we'll make sure to check in with any students if we're noticing anything of potential concern when we look at their academic progress in relation to their host university application. So hopefully that helps and gives a bit of assurance.
Great, and we have a follow-up from the same person. Also, should we wait to apply for a student visa until after we are officially accepted from the host university? I think we answered that one. All right, next one. Does everyone need to have a student visa?
So I think that's going to be dependent. That's not something that our office is really able to advise on specifically. Generally speaking, we would ask that you consult with your host university after you've completed your application if you do have any questions about whether you are required to have a study permit or visa. Not every university, but many of our partners do have registered immigration student advisors on staff, just like Queen's does here in the International Center. And if they don't have registered immigration advisors on staff, then they're able to usually point you to resources from the government of the host country, especially with things changing rapidly around the world with travel and COVID. It's most important that you're getting information directly from those official sources.
Great, thanks, Haley. That seems to be all the questions for now, but let's just hold off and see if there's any more coming in. Just wait a couple seconds. There we go. Okay, next question. The credit load listed for my host university, which is the UCD, on the IPO website is more than is legally required, and I'm ahead in the number of credits I need. Do I need to take the credit load listed, or can I do the legal minimum for exchange students instead?
Oh, that's interesting. And I'm not entirely sure what's meant by the legal requirement. What we advise students who go out on the program, and we're going to speak about this at the academic orientation, is to complete a full course load at their host university. So typically in the UK, that's 60 credits per term. And I'm not sure off the top of my head, I think it's the same for Dublin, but we'd have to check the website. And if students complete that and earn the Queen's equivalent of a C grade in their courses, then they are eligible to transfer back a full credit load. If you are needing or wanting to take any less than that, then there's information we want to provide you in terms of the financial implications of that decision. And there's also considerations that we have for the host university. So agreements are formed with the understanding that students are ideally going to be completing a full course load when they go abroad. We would need to be checking things out with UCD in this particular situation just to confirm if a student was taking a reduced load, that still met their standards, particularly for immigration and visa purposes. So we're going to get into more details about that the academic orientation session, the first of which is next Tuesday, I believe. So it's a great question, and I'll get you to hold on to that and learn a little bit more about that with us next week. And we can certainly revisit that if you've got more questions on that front too.
Okay, thank you. When should we expect to choose courses at our host university? And then follow-up question, when do you suggest we begin looking for housing abroad? So let's talk about courses.
Okay, so of course it's going to be dependent on each host university. Sometimes host universities will ask students to list the courses that they're interested in their application. So right from that initial moment of contact with the host university. Other times students will be asked in a separate process after they've applied and been accepted, but before they depart to register for courses. And the third most common version of course registration at a host university is not doing really any course registration work with the host university until students arrive on campus. So it's going to fluctuate and depend, but again, I would direct you back to the fact sheets on our website. That's really where you're going to find the guide to your host university as an exchange student. And most of our partners are including at least general information about what their course registration looks like.
Great. And the second question was, when do you suggest we begin looking for housing?
This is also something that you'll follow the lead of your host university on. So once you've applied, you'll start receiving information about how you apply for housing. Again, it really 40 different partners. So sometimes students are applying for housing and they're also applying to the university at the same time. An example of that is the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill in Barbados. Other times students are looking for off-campus housing, and that information is usually mentioned in the fact sheet. Other times students are applying after they've been accepted to on-campus housing. So there's a lot of potential scenarios. Again, I will direct you to take a look at the fact sheet on our website.
Thank you, Haley. All right, let's see if there's any more questions.
I see there's a little more context here for the question that was asked about UCD. And that's just reminded me of the next session that we have. So again, more information is coming, but something that I think you'll all find really reassuring to know is we are producing for each of you an individualized document called the Academic Parameters of Your Exchange. It's a one-page PDF that comes from our office, and it tells you how many units you need to enroll in, and then any particular considerations in terms of academics. So for instance, at Sciences Po, it says you can't receive transfer credit by participating in their orientation, even though the university provides some credit to their degree seeking students for that orientation program. So it will lay out those kinds of unique specifics at host universities. So that's coming along soon. And that's also going to guide some of your pre-departure planning along with the information you get from host universities.
Excellent. Okay, we have another question. Will our host university provide support when navigating the courses we want to take? I'm still a little unsure what the third year equivalent of my host university courses are because their system is a little different from Canada's.
Yeah, we really appreciate how important it is for you to have that knowledge so you can properly plan for degree progression. So we're going to talk about this at the next session, which is our academic orientation. We have a package called the Transfer Credit Package, which includes a timeline, contact information for folks at Queen's who are your transfer credit advisors. And that orientation session is going to initiate for you your contact with those folks. They're going to be your Queen's advisor as you go through the course registration process with your host universities. So you'll have support in terms of navigating the registration process at your host university from the host university, and then you will have that Queen's support in terms of what the courses at the host university mean when they transfer back to Queen's. So all of this is certainly going to be coming through. Like I mentioned, you're going to be receiving this package and information in the next couple of weeks, and it's going to give you lots of time to make sure that you're planning in accordance with your host university's timelines.
Thank you, Haley.